Here we see them met by the chair of the Nobel Committee, Jørgen Vatne Frydnes. At his side, the director of the Nobel Institute, Olav Njølstad. This will be his last ceremony as director, as he will retire in the new year and be replaced by Christian Berg-Harpviken, the former head of the Peace Research Institute in Oslo. Nihon Hidankyo was started in 1956, 11 years after the devastating atomic attack on Japan at the end of World War II. It began as an organization for the survivors of the attacks, but they quickly joined the worldwide movement for a global ban on nuclear weapons and, most importantly, their abolition, work that continues to this day. Built 88 years ago, Oslo's City Hall's facade has been extensively renovated this year. All the stonework has been cleaned, and we now see the Oslo Girl, a bronze statue by artist Josef Grimeland. The whole figure has been cleaned and its surface gilded, and she looks quite lovely in the crisp December light. On the left side of the podium in the City Hall, the laureate's guests are seated in the front rows. We often refer to this side of the hall as the international side. The front rows are set aside for the guests of the prize winners, often family members, and, as today, other representatives from Nihon Hidankyo. Further back, we have several top-ranking diplomats. In the fifth row, the Swedish ambassador alongside the Japanese ambassador. Interestingly, given this is a prize for the anti-nuclear movement, the ambassadors from several nuclear powers are also present. In the eighth row, the French ambassador, the ambassadors of India and Pakistan in the ninth row, the United States and the United Kingdom a little further back still. On the right side of the hall, we see guests officially representing Norway in their various roles. In the front there, the President of the Norwegian Parliament, Masud Gharahkhani, beside him, Prime Minister Jonas Gahr Støre. Now several prominent government ministers, such as the Minister of Finance, Trygve Slagsvold Vedum. In the row behind, we see the leader of the Conservative Party, Erna Solberg, with her husband. There's always some excitement about the flower arrangements in City Hall, and this year is no exception. The man behind this year's display is Stein Are Hansen, one of Norway's most famous floral decorators. We see a foundation of dried Japanese knotweed, a bronze-brown colour. The decorations feature gold leaf, recalling the colour of the prize itself, and the main flower is the large, red amaryllis, a favourite at Christmas time in Norway and around the world. This year's Nobel diploma is by Marie Buskov, originally from Denmark. She was educated at the Academy of the Fine Arts in Oslo, and her work is currently on display at the National Museum of Norway. This is the first time Buskov has been commissioned to illustrate the Nobel diploma. As we can see, it's an abstract painting that the artist herself describes as representing freedom, choice, and imagination. The painting was created before it was announced who would receive the prize this year. And now we may admire the decorations in this beautiful hall. On one wall, a large oil painting by the artist Henrik Sørensen. Here we see King Haakon's return to Norway in 1945, welcomed by the future Prime Minister Einar Gerhardsen, often referred to as the father of the nation. In the upper part of the painting, we see the female figure Mercy, giving a golden apple to a child. And on the opposite wall, above the main entrance, a large fresco by Alf Rolfsen depicting Norwegian working life. Tradition dictates that the prize be awarded here in Oslo on December 10th. The reason, of course, the anniversary of Alfred Nobel's death in 1896. And it's also International Human Rights Day. And now, the cars carrying the royal family arriving in the courtyard. First to arrive will be King Harald and Queen Sonja, followed by Crown Prince Haakon and Crown Princess Mette-Marit. The king here being greeted by Anne Lindboe, Mayor of Oslo. And now, the royal procession enters City Hall, accompanied by the staff band of the armed forces playing a parade march. The laureates enter the hall now, accompanied by members of the Nobel Committee. Two of them are in wheelchairs due to their advanced age. Leading the procession, Deputy Chair Asle Toje, walking with Terumi Tanaka. Shigemitsu Tanaka follows on foot with Anne Enger, and Toshiyuki Mimaki is with Kristin Clemet. Following them is the newest member of the Nobel Committee, Gry Larsen. They take their designated places on the podium and will remain standing until the royal family has entered the hall. And now the royal procession. His Majesty King Harald leads the way, walking with the chair of the Nobel Committee, Jørgen Vatne Fridnes. Her Majesty Queen Sonja follows beside the director of the Nobel Committee, Olav Njølstad. Behind him, His Royal Highness Crown Prince Haakon, together with Her Royal Highness Crown Princess Mette-Marit. Following them, the Mayor of Oslo, Anne Lindboe, and His Majesty the King's military staff. They take their seats and the ceremony may begin. We begin with music. Soprano Mari Eriksmoen will be the first to perform the piece Morgen, Tomorrow, by Richard Strauss, arranged by Thomas Nettel. She will be accompanied by a string quartet.
Excellencies, distinguished guests, ladies and gentlemen. There lies before us, if we choose, continual progress in happiness, knowledge and wisdom. Shall we instead choose death because we cannot forget our quarrels? We appeal as human beings to human beings. Remember your humanity and forget the rest. If you can do so, the way lies open to a new paradise. If you cannot, there lies before you the risk of universal death. Bertrand Russell, Albert Einstein, and other prominent intellectuals from around the world posed these questions to humanity in 1955. Their famous manifesto highlighted the dangers of nuclear war and urged global leaders to seek peaceful ways of resolving international conflicts. Today we must ask ourselves once more, have we remembered our humanity? Have we chosen a path towards the light, or are we still on the road to destruction and death? Russell and Einstein composed their manifesto 10 years after two American atomic bombs killed an estimated 120,000 inhabitants of Hiroshima and Nagasaki. A comparable number died of burn and radiation injuries in the ensuing months and years. The Japanese cities were almost entirely destroyed, resulting in social and economic collapse. Many of the nearly 650,000 survivors have struggled with psychological trauma and physical suffering. They have been silenced, neglected, and stigmatized. They have had to fight not only for their economic rights, but for simple acknowledgement for the hardship they have endured. Nihon Hidankyo, a grassroots movement of atomic bomb survivors from Hiroshima and Nagasaki, is receiving the Nobel Peace Prize for 2024 for its efforts to achieve a world free of nuclear weapons and for demonstrating through witness testimony that nuclear weapons must never be used again. This year's Peace Prize to Nihon Hidankyo joins a distinguished list of peace prizes that the Norwegian Nobel Committee has previously awarded to champions of nuclear disarmament and arms control. These laureates have worked in different ways to reduce the threat by nuclear weapons. 13 Nobel Peace Prizes have been awarded in full or in part for peace efforts of this kind. On each occasion, the Norwegian Nobel Committee has warned against the menace of nuclear weapons. This year, that warning is more urgent than ever before. As 2025 approaches, the world is entering in what many analysts characterize as a new, more unstable nuclear age. The role of nuclear weapons in international politics is changing. The nuclear powers are modernizing and upgrading their arsenals. New countries appear to be preparing to obtain nuclear weapons. Key arms control agreements are expiring without being replaced, and threats to use nuclear weapons in ongoing warfare have been made openly and repeatedly. It is perhaps necessary to remind ourselves just what nuclear weapons are. The most destructive weapon the world has ever seen. Today's nuclear weapons, and there are more than 12,000 of them, have far greater destructive power than the two bombs used against Japan in 1945. They could kill millions of us in an instant, injure even more, and disrupt the climate catastrophically. A nuclear war could destroy our civilization. Although the shadow of nuclear weapons continue to loom over the world, we gather here today in a spirit of hope. For there is a point of light that we must recognize. It is the fact that no nuclear weapons has been used in war since 1945. In response to the atomic bomb attacks of World War II, a global movement arose whose members have worked tirelessly to raise awareness about the catastrophic humanitarian consequences of using nuclear weapons. Gradually, an international norm developed that stigmatizes the use of nuclear weapons as morally unacceptable. This norm is often referred to as the nuclear taboo, a term coined by the political scientist Nina Tannenwald, who is present here today. Like other international norms, the nuclear taboo is maintained by collective agreement, by widespread moral outrage at the prospect of using nuclear weapons, and by a mutual fear of the abyss awaiting humanity if the norm is violated. But the taboo is fragile, and it becomes more so with the passage of time. We therefore need reminding. Nihon Hirankyo and the Hibakusha, the survivors of the atomic bomb attacks on Hiroshima and Nagasaki, have never wavered in their efforts to erect a worldwide moral and legal bulwark against the use of nuclear weapons. Their role in establishing the taboo is unique. Their personal stories humanize history, lifting the veil of forgetfulness and drawing us out of our daily routines. They bridge the gap between those who were there and we others, untouched by the violence of the past. They are living reminders of what is at stake. To our dear guests from Nihon Hidankyo, Terumi Tanaka, Toshiyuki Mimaki, Shigemitsu Tanaka, and to all Hibakusha who are present here today, it is an honor to be your hosts on this historic occasion, and we wish to express our deep gratitude for the outstanding and vital work you have performed in the course of your lives and for all that you continue to do. You did not resign yourself to victimhood. You defined yourselves as survivors. You refused to sit in terror as the great powers led us through long periods of nuclear armament. You stood tall and shared your unique personal testimony with the entire world. A light in the darkest night, a path forward. You give us hope. Decade after decade, your stories, your educational work, and your urgent warnings against the proliferation and the use of nuclear arms have helped to promote and consolidate widespread opposition to these weapons around the world. You help us to describe the indescribable, to think the unthinkable, and to somehow grasp the incomprehensible pain and suffering caused by nuclear weapons. You have never given up. You're a symbol of resilience. You are the light the world needs. I am 40 years old, belong to a generation in Norway with no direct experience of war. I grew up after the end of the Cold War, when democracy seemed unstoppable and nuclear disarmament realistic. My generation lived through an optimistic bubble in history. That time is over. For more than half of my working life, I have dealt with the consequences of terror and experienced the cruel aftermath of young lives being brutally torn away. Working with pain, sorrow, and trauma, I've learned to recognize the power of stories and of memories. The way we remember violent or traumatic historical events, both individually and collectively, determines whether and how we move forward as a society or remained trapped in the past. Not just individuals, but entire societies, current and future, are shaped by trauma. It is our duty not to forget. It is our responsibility to pass along stories and memories to future generations, including the painful, disturbing ones, which often yield to society's amnesia. Governments and rulers often have a need to move on. In many cases, this is because somebody wants to avoid being held to account. For people not directly affected, forgetting may also be a matter of comfort. It spares us the distress of entering into the suffering of others, and thus of needing to care. Those who are directly swept up in violent events may find it hard to talk about their own suffering. After traumatic experiences, many survivors have both a fear of their own memories and a fear of forgetting. As we are gathered here today, the Nobel Prizes in medicine, physics, chemistry, and literature are being presented in Stockholm. While this year's Peace Prize laureate is Nihon Hidankyo, the recipient of the Nobel Prize in Literature is the South Korean novelist Han Kang. Her writings about trauma and memory are part of the reason she was selected for the award. She has said, "I believe that trauma is something to be embraced rather than healed or recovered from. I believe that grief is something which situates the space of the dead within the living, and that through repeatedly revisiting that place, through our pained and silent embrace of it over the course of a whole life, life is, perhaps paradoxically, made possible." Memories can imprison us, cut us off, prevent us from moving on, but they can also be a catalyst for new life, a safeguard against forgetfulness, and a tool for honoring those who have suffered. Memory work can be an act of resistance, a force for change. For this, we need all our institutions of memory, history writing, documentation, and education, as well as personal testimony, literature, and art. The Norwegian Nobel Committee today honors all survivors who, despite physical suffering and painful memories, have chosen to use their costly experience to cultivate hope and engagement for peace. Our tribute also extends to the 500,000 hibakusha who have died since 1945 and who for many years offered their first-hand testimony while helping to develop and uphold the critical international taboo against nuclear weapons. One day, the hibakusha will no longer be among us as witnesses to history. But with a strong culture of remembrance and a continued commitment, younger generations in Japan and elsewhere are carrying forward the experience and the message of the witnesses. They too have inspired and educated people around the world. But they must not bear this responsibility their own. We all have a duty to fulfill the mission of the hibakusha. Their moral compass is our inheritance. It is now our turn. Disarmament efforts require insistent public appeals and sustained pressure. A new generation of brave voices, interested students, and willing teachers is needed. Disarmament also requires courageous and visionary political leaders. None of the 9 countries that possess nuclear weapons, the United States, Russia, China, France, the United Kingdom, India, Pakistan, Israel, and North Korea, appear interested in nuclear disarmament and arms control at present. On the contrary, they are modernizing and building up their nuclear arsenals. The Norwegian Nobel Committee calls upon the 5 nuclear weapon states that have signed the Non-Proliferation Treaty to take seriously their obligations under this treaty. In addition, more countries must ratify the Treaty on the Prohibition of Nuclear Weapons. Political action is crucial. The Nobel Peace Prize for 2024 validates the most fundamental human right, the right to live. This year's prize also fulfills Alfred Nobel's desire to recognize those who devote their lives to the work of benefiting humankind. In the committee room of the Norwegian Nobel Institute here in Oslo hang the portraits of every Nobel Peace Prize laureate since 1901. Two of the portraits are of Ales Bialiatski and Nargis Mohammadi, who received their prizes in 2022 and 2023, respectively. Both are serving long prison sentences for their peaceful advocacy of human rights, the very work they earned them the Nobel Peace Prize. The Norwegian Nobel Committee calls upon the Iranian and Belarusian authorities to release them immediately, permanently, and unconditionally. Their portraits and those of all the other laureates serve as an important reminder that injustice, brutality, and war are still with us, but also that society can change for the better. The portraits tell a story of courageous people who never give up in the struggle to bring about positive change. We are not doomed by some genetic code to repeat the mistakes of the past. We can learn. We can choose another path. We can raise our children to believe in a shared human destiny. We can listen to Russell and Einstein and remember our humanity. The path towards a world free of nuclear weapons remains long. We will see progress and setbacks, but that does not mean the vision cannot eventually become reality. Imagine a world in which 100 years have passed since nuclear weapons were used on the battlefield. Surely this is a vision we can all share. We could listen to those who claim it is pointless, or instead take inspiration from the Hibakusha, from their stamina and persistence. It is naive to believe our civilization can survive a world order in which global security depends on nuclear weapons. The world is not meant to be a prison in which we await collective annihilation. No matter how long and difficult the path, we should learn from Nihon Hidankyo. We must never give up. So let us listen to the testimony of Hibakusha. Let their courage be our inspiration. Let their persistence drive us forward. Let us all strive to keep the nuclear taboo intact. Our survival depends on it. Thank you. I now call upon Mr. Terumi Tanaka, Mr. Shigemitsu Tanaka, and Mr. Toshiyuki Mimaki, representing Nihon Hidankyo, the Nobel Peace Prize laureates for 2024, to step forward to receive the diploma and the gold medal. I now call upon Mr. Terumi Tanaka to deliver the Nobel Peace Prize Lecture 2024 on Nihon Hidankyo's behalf. Mr. Tanaka, will you please take the floor?
Your Majesties, Your Royal Highnesses, Excellencies, members of the Norwegian Nobel Committee, ladies and gentlemen, and friends from around the world striving to abolish nuclear weapons. Thank you for your introduction. I am Terumi Tanaka, one of the 3 co-chairpersons of Nihon Hidankyo. I'm honored to speak on behalf of Nihon Hidankyo, the Nobel laureate, Peace Laureate of this year. We established Nihon Hidankyo, the Japan Confederation of A and H bomb sufferers organizations, in August 1956. Having ourselves survived the inhumane impacts of atomic bombings, damage unprecedented in history, we launched this movement to ensure such suffering would never be repeated with 2 basic demands. The first demand is that the state which started and carried out the war should compensate victims for the damage caused by the atomic bombs, in opposition to the Japanese government's assertion that the sacrifice of war should be endured equally by the whole nation. The second is to demand the immediate abolition of nuclear weapons as extremely inhumane weapons of mass killing, which must not be allowed to coexist with humanity. Our movement has undoubtedly played a major role in creating the nuclear taboo. However, there still remain 12,000 nuclear warheads on the Earth today, 4,000 of which are operationally deployed, ready for immediate launch. The nuclear superpower, Russia, threatens to use nuclear weapons in its war against Ukraine. And a cabinet member of Israel, in the midst of its unrelenting attacks on Gaza in Palestine, even spoke of the possible use of nuclear arms. In addition to the civilian casualties, I am infinitely saddened and angered that the nuclear taboo threatens to be broken. I am one of the survivors of the atomic bombing of Nagasaki. At the time, I was 13 years old, at home, around 3 kilometers east of Ground Zero. It was 9th of August, 1945. I suddenly heard the buzzing sound of a bomber jet. It was soon after, engulfed in a bright white light. And surprised, I ran downstairs and got down on the floor, covering my eyes and ears with my hands. The next moment, an intense shockwave passed through our entire house. I have no memory of that moment, but when I came to my senses, I found myself under a large glass sliding door. And it was a miracle that none of the glass was broken, and I was somehow spared injuries. Three days later, I sought out the families of my 2 aunts who lived in the area near the hypocenter. It was then that I saw the full devastation of the bombing of Nagasaki. Walking with my mother, we went around a small mountain. Reaching a pass, we looked down in horror. Blackened ruins spread out as far as the port of Nagasaki, some 3 kilometers away. And Uramaki Cathedral, the largest brick church in the east, had collapsed to the ground, leaving no trace. All the houses along the path down to the foot of the mountain were burnt to the ground, and corpses lay scattered around them. Many people who were badly injured or burned but still alive were left unattended, with no help whatsoever. I became almost devoid of emotion, somehow closing off my sense of humanity, and simply headed intently for my destination. I found the charred body of one aunt at the remains of her house, 400 meters from the hypercenter, along with the body of her grandson, a university student. The other aunt's house had collapsed and become a pile of wood. My grandfather was crouched down on the brink of death with severe burns all over his body. My aunt had been severely burned and died just before we arrived. We cremated her remains with our own hands. My uncle, who was initially mostly unharmed, had left the area to seek help. And we later learned that he too had collapsed at a rescue station and died after suffering from a high fever for over a week. Thus, one single atomic bomb transformed 5 of my relatives so mercilessly, taking all of their lives in one fell swoop. The deaths that I witnessed at that time could hardly be described as human deaths. There were hundreds of people suffering in agony, unable to receive any kind of medical attention. I strongly felt that even in war, such killing and maiming must never be allowed to happen. The Nagasaki bomb exploded 600 meters above the city. 50% of the energy released caused shockwaves that crushed houses. And 35% caused heat rays that severely burned people who were outside and ignited fires throughout the collapsed houses. Many people were crushed and burned to death inside their homes. The remaining 15% penetrated the human body as neutron and gamma rays, destroying it from the inside out, leading to death and causing atomic bomb sickness. By the end of that year, of 1945, the death toll in the 2 cities is thought to have been approximately 140,000 in Hiroshima and 70,000 in Nagasaki. 400,000 people are estimated to have been exposed to the atomic bombs, suffering injuries and surviving exposure to radiation. The survivors, the hibakusha, were forced into silence by the occupying forces for 7 years. Furthermore, they were also abandoned by the Japanese government. Thus, they spent more than a decade after the bombings in isolation, suffering from illness and hardship in their lives, while also enduring prejudice and discrimination. The United States hydrogen bomb test at Bikini Atoll on March 1, 1954, resulted in the exposure of Japanese fishing boats to deadly radioactive fallout, or the ashes of death. Among others, all 23 crew members of the Daigo Fukuryu-maru were exposed to radiation and developed acute radiation sickness. And the tuna that they caught were discarded. This incident triggered a nationwide petition calling for a total ban on atomic and hydrogen bombs and tests. This spread like wildfire throughout Japan and also throughout the world. This gained over 30 million signatures, and in August 1955, the first World Conference against atomic and hydrogen bombs was held in Hiroshima. This was followed by the second conference in Nagasaki the following year. And encouraged by this movement, A-bomb survivors who participated in the World Conference formed the Japan Confederation of A and H bomb sufferers organizations Nihon Hidankyo on August 10, 1956, in the city of Nagasaki. In our founding declaration, Nihon Hidankyo expressed its determination to save humanity from its crisis through the lessons learned from our own experiences, while at the same time saving ourselves. We launched a movement demanding both the abolition of nuclear weapons and state compensation for the atomic bomb damage suffered. Our initial campaign resulted in the enactment of the A-bomb sufferers' medical care law in 1957. However, the content of the law was limited. Besides issuing atomic bomb survivor certificates and providing free medical examinations, medical expenses would be paid only for illnesses recognized as atomic bomb related by the Minister of Health and Welfare. In 1968, the law concerning special measures for A-bomb sufferers was enacted, providing several types of benefits. However, this was only as part of the social security system, and demands for state compensation remained refused. In 1985, Nihon Hidankyo conducted a nationwide survey of atomic bomb victims. This revealed that the damage inflicted on the A-bomb victims had impacted their lives, bodies, minds, and livelihoods. Their lives had been stolen. They had suffered physical and psychological scars. And they struggled to work because of illness and because of prejudice. The results of the survey strongly supported the basic demands of the A-bomb survivors, reinforcing their determination that no one in the world should again be allowed to experience the horrific suffering that they themselves had gone through. In December 1994, the law concerning relief to atomic bomb survivors, the A-bomb Survivors Relief Law, was enacted, combining the former two laws. However, no compensation was provided for the hundreds of thousands of deaths, and to this day, the Japanese government has consistently refused to provide state compensation, limiting its measures to radiation damage only. And let me repeat again, for those who lost their lives in the atomic bombs, the Japanese government has made no compensation whatsoever. This is the reality, and I wish to draw your attention to this. And for many years, these laws did not apply to A-bomb survivors living abroad, regardless of their nationality. Korean hibakusha who were exposed to the atomic bombings in Japan and returned to their home countries, as well as many hibakusha who emigrated to the United States, Brazil, Mexico, Canada, and other countries after the war, suffered both from diseases unique to hibakusha and from a lack of understanding by others of the damage caused by the A-bomb. Nihon Hidankyo worked in solidarity with the associations of A-bomb survivors formed in each country, and both in law courts and through joint actions, we urge the government of Japan to act, which led to the provision of almost the same support for the A-bomb survivors abroad as those in Japan. Our movement has continued to call for the immediate elimination of nuclear weapons, urging our own government, the nuclear weapon states, and all other states to take action. In 1977, an international symposium on the damage and after effects of the atomic bombing of Hiroshima and Nagasaki was held in Japan under the auspices of NGOs associated to the United Nations. The symposium clarified the reality of the damage caused by the atomic bombings to human beings. And around this time, the threat of nuclear war was rising in Europe. Large rallies of hundreds of thousands of people took place in numerous countries, and hibakusha were asked to give testimony at these rallies. In 1978 and in 1982, nearly 40 representatives of Nihon Hidankyo participated in the UN special sessions on disarmament held at the United Nations headquarters in New York. Our representatives spoke in the General Assembly Hall and gave testimony at local schools and gatherings. Representatives of Nihon Hidankyo have also secured opportunities to speak at the review conferences of the Treaty on the Non-Proliferation of Nuclear Weapons and its preparatory committee meetings. During the review conferences, they held A-bomb exhibitions in the main lobby of the UN General Assembly Hall, and this was done to great acclaim. In 2012, at the preparatory committee for the NPT review conference, the Norwegian government proposed holding a conference on the humanitarian impact of nuclear weapons. Hibakusha testimonies given at the 3 humanitarian conferences, which started in 2013, were taken very seriously and led to the negotiations toward the Treaty on the Prohibition of Nuclear Weapons. In April 2016, A-bomb survivors around the world launched the international signature campaign in support of the appeal of the hibakusha for the elimination of nuclear weapons, as proposed by Nihon Hidankyo. This campaign grew significantly, and over 13.7 million signatures were collected and submitted to the United Nations. And we are joyed that, as a result of that, in part, on the 7th of July 2017, the Treaty on the Prohibition of Nuclear Weapons was adopted with the support of 122 countries. For us, this was a huge occasion for joy. It is the heartfelt desire of the hibakusha that, rather than depending on the theory of nuclear deterrence, which assumes the possession and use of nuclear weapons, we must not allow the possession of a single nuclear weapon. Please try to imagine for a moment. There are 4,000 nuclear warheads ready to be launched immediately. This means that damage hundreds or thousands of times greater than that which happened in Hiroshima and Nagasaki could happen right away. And at any time, anyone here could either become a victim or a perpetrator. I therefore plead for everyone around the world to discuss together what it is that we must do to eliminate nuclear weapons and demand actions from governments to achieve this goal. The average age of the A-bomb survivors is now 85. And 10 years from now, there may only be a handful of us able to give testimony as first-hand survivors. From now on, I hope that the next generation will find ways to build on our efforts and develop the movement even further. One thing that will serve as a great resource is the existence of the No More Hibakusha project, inheriting memories of the A and H bomb sufferers. This non-profit organization has worked closely with Nihon Hidankyo to preserve records of hibakusha of the records of the Hibakusha movement, the testimonies of A-bomb survivors, as well as the activities of Hibakusha organizations in various parts of Japan. For nearly 15 years since its formation, this organization has endeavored persistently to preserve and manage an archive of the grassroots movements of Hibakusha, the testimonies and the activities of Hibakusha organizations in different localities. I hope that the association will take a major step forward in the movement to make use of these materials externally. I'm hopeful that it will become an organization that takes action, devoting its efforts to the dissemination of the reality of the atomic bombings. And furthermore, I strongly hope that it will expand its activities, not only within Japan, but also internationally. To achieve further universalization of the Treaty of the Prohibition of Nuclear Weapons and the formulation of an international convention which will abolish nuclear weapons, I urge everyone around the world to create opportunities in your own countries to listen to the testimonies of A-bomb survivors. And please feel with deep sensitivity the true inhumanity of nuclear weapons. In particular, I hope that the belief that nuclear weapons cannot and must not coexist with humanity will take firm hold among citizens of nuclear weapon states and their allies, and that this will become a force for change in the nuclear policies of their governments. Let not humanity destroy itself with nuclear weapons. Let us work together for a human society in a world free of nuclear weapons and free of wars. Thank you for your kind attention.
Yes, I agree. I hope they are positive. Yes, it is.